Gentlemen, so Juan, as a negotiator in global climate diplomacy, one of the loudest voices in this last COP, what frameworks do you believe the Digital Asset Commission must adopt to ensure nature-backed assets are governed with environmental integrity, which is what we talked about earlier before, and I thought that was just fascinating. So if you could, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sergio, and thank you to everyone for engaging in this very important conversation. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. Internationally, we have already agreed on the roadmaps to solve the climate crisis, to solve the biodiversity crisis. On the climate side, you have the Paris Agreement. And in the Paris Agreement, we have many elements. And one of them is the international carbon market. So there we need help from the private sector, from innovators, to be able to figure out how do we sell these credits in a way that are not only traceable, but also that we ensure that those credits were developed with integrity. On top of that, if we go to the Biodiversity Convention, at the last meeting in Colombia last year, there was a massive outcome. We finally agree on an international fund for the protection of genetic resources that are in each country that we represent. But we still have not figured out how we're gonna be able to track those genetic resources. And what is the caveat here? If a pharmaceutical company, if a company that is utilizing nature to develop an innovation, they have to, number one, report to that government, and number two, pay a fee on the use of that genetic resources. But we also need to be able to make them traceable. So these are two, very concrete spaces and areas where the data can focus on helping to move these assets forward. But also 3 weeks ago, the International Maritime Organization approved the first international carbon tax for an international sector. So in 2 years, every boat that weighs more than 5,000 gross tons is gonna have to comply with fuel standards. And if they don't comply with fuel standards, they will have to pay a minimum of $100 tax. We are still yet to figure out what are the credits that are gonna come on board to be able to compensate for those that don't comply, and what's the traceability gonna be. So there you have 3 concrete spaces where the DAC can focus on working with governments like mine that are ultimately the players that put the ideas in the negotiation tables, and we need help. Government people pretend that they know everything, and honestly, we know 10% of what we pretend we know, because many of these things in nature are still yet being figured out. So that's my take.
Thank you so much for that, Juan. Lord Fakafanua, from a parliamentary and SID's perspective, what governance mechanisms are needed to ensure small islands have a voice in the digital asset future and policy development?
Thank you, Sergio, and I'm very privileged to be amongst yourself and my friend Juan here, because I know absolutely nothing about digital assets, and I admit that as a legislator. So I think that's a good outcome of this conversation. But seriously speaking, from the perspective of small island developing states, is that when you think about ground zero or the platform that you're standing on, small islands really don't have the same infrastructure. They don't have the same sophistication in terms of regulations and capacity of regulators. We lack the infrastructure. We don't have the service. And so when you think about building from the ground up, it's really from 0 to 100 in islands. And what we're presented with in small island developing states is really a clean slate. A clean slate where we can rebuild from the bottom. We can tokenize our natural assets. We can put that all on platforms such as what Sean Cole was talking about, the peer-to-peer verification. We can do that in an island because we're small, we're nimble. We have, in Tonga, for instance, there's only 100,000 people. Why can't we? And there's the value that we have to give back to Earth, because as a small island developing state, we can actually become the model that can be scaled for the rest of the planet. where we value our natural assets. And as a legislator, I'm excited to see best practices on how to build some of these regulations at the ground on a national level, how to harmonize it on a local scale, and really become a more resilient island.
Thank you so much. So, back to you, Juan. How can the DAC, the DBRP, and ourselves at PVBLIC support ministries and national strategies in operationalizing, elements of what we see in the Beyond GDP, at the Summit of the Future, metrics, understanding geospatial data, and RWNA, or real world natural assets implementation?
So here's a little secret. When you hear about a government, you might be believing that the government is just one aligned team. Turns out, that's not the reality. Turns out that you have a series of ministries, of institutions, and each one of them is pulling their own direction. So when you look at the landscape, you have ministries of environment who are the newest, the smallest, the least founded members of this constellation of parties inside of government, trying to preach fight for nature, fight for nature, fight for nature. But I think our big barrier has been that we have focused so much on the hard science of nature, and we have not really been able to couple it with the economic side of the benefits of protecting nature. And sometimes it is actually best for me to achieve my goal for someone from PVBLIC or for someone from the World Bank to say what I believe to my own people in Panama than me saying it. So what PVBLIC and other organizations can do is to pick champions. If you want to get to a methodology that you want to pilot, you need to pick a few champions. You pick a few champions from the islands so that they can rally the group. You pick a few champions from Latin America so that we can rally a group. And it's ultimately a negotiations. And we need to have scenarios on what we can give in, what we cannot. So ultimately what we need is support to understand these topics, because as the Lord mentioned and myself, we're not experts on these topics. We're experts in getting things moved through government, whatever they are, but we need the technical expertise to be able to convince our own people, because most times they listen more to people from the outside than to people from the inside. And it is a constant struggle. I always tell everyone that the most difficult fight working for government is the inner fight. It's not even like the big problems outside. So I guess we need to formalize the structure. You need to pick some champions. We need to build an alliance, and we need to be out there. We need to be seen, and we need to be outspoken.
Thank you, Juan. Lord Fakafanua. Lord.
Yes.
So, given Tonga's leadership, I'm going to put you on a spot here. Just, leadership with the DBRP, right? Literally, you were the first, we heard Ashaki say, first one to sign on. It's the most difficult part everybody knows about legislature, policy making, treaty making. It's the first country to sign on. The rest follow, right? Because there's always needs to be that one staunch leader. And
we were also the first to sign on to the Blue Planet Alliance with Hank Rogers.
There you go. So you have a history of standing in a line of, really broad shoulders and doing things that are going to defend nature, defend the oceans, defend the environment. And, obviously in the work that your country has been doing is supporting the Development Bank for Resilient Prosperity, the Data Alliance, and a lot of that work. How can we look at the regional engagement, to bridge the gap between, regional and national legislative frameworks and global standards, as we heard Juan say before in a panel before. He talked about what do we need? Global standards. And in looking at sort of real world natural assets, tokenization and data governance. How can we start to look at that in the regional approach from the South Pacific, given your global leadership, but how do we bring that to the regional?
I think it's really important to acknowledge the role that regional organizations have to play, such as the Pacific Island Forum Leaders Forum, which Tonga is currently chairing. And to give you an idea of what the Pacific Island Leaders Forum is, it's all the nation states or small and developing states in the Pacific, and they meet every year, and the host country becomes chair, and they basically champion the ambition of the small and developing states. This year, Tonga is currently chairing, and in September we'll be handing over to the new chair that will take on the mission of the small and developing states into next year, and that will be Solomon Islands. And so Tonga participating in forums like EarthX here, bringing the regional to the global. And we're very fortunate to partner with technical experts and support people like Dr. Jean here, who we've had previous discussions over the last few years about creating things like the bank, resiliency, and really we have to harmonize these global ambitions through the regional organizations such as the Pacific Island Forum. And I'm just really glad to see everything take shape. I've heard previous speakers mention we just need to start. We just need to start, and Tonga's initiating the snowballing effect, and hopefully we'll be able to reach some of those targets next year. It needs to be funded. I think that's the key element. We've created the frameworks, and we've built the banks, but those silos need to be filled. And that's the critical element, because we can lay the best plans, but if it's not backed by resource, it's not going to happen. And to link back to what you were talking about, the announcement at IMO with global shipping, fantastic. But if we're just going to add an extra tax that will be passed on to the consumers, the critical element for that to be successful is sustainable fuel. And there is no pipeline for sustainable fuel that will have a deep and meaningful impact in global trade. There's no supply, it doesn't exist. So that tariff that they're going to add to the ships that don't comply to the new standards, we the consumers, the islands who rely on trade and shipping, will end up paying for it. And so we have to be cognizant of the fact that when we create some of these, user pay frameworks, we have to ensure that there is something behind it to ensure that we are not taxing the people that we're trying to help.
Thank you. Juan, love your feedback on that, and also give us a little bit of the lessons from PANA's innovation in climate and environmental finance, and how these conversations. I think what a lot of people here need to understand, and both are saying, and a lot of the role that we work with family offices to help bring in some of that financing. The government could set the frameworks. The government could do everything that they can, but if the support isn't there, then their work just goes out the window. And I think it's important that it is a true partnership, that everyone is needed. Private sector, innovators. A lot of young tech companies come, and they come to these countries and they're like, well, we're going to go do this, but you need to give me the rights. I'm going to go build $1 billion company, and then the government's left behind with nothing, and the people even less. And so I think the narrative on inclusive evolution of technology and entrepreneurship and development has to have that whole thought process, because I love what you said around, sometimes there are tariffs or things that are, really at the end of the day hurting the same people we're trying to help. And, so entrepreneurship with purpose and passion that is built on actually delivering something that is going to do good for the country, not leveraging government. And I think that leveraging government, and Sean said it great too, the oligarchs of the tech world of today, take. Facebook could turn off Facebook in Australia tomorrow. And where did, they become a technology-based non-state, actor, non-state actor. And so how do we, bring that together? We're going through a new evolution, right? We have a new generation of leaders. Look at these guys. They're literally running regional platforms in their countries. And I feel like the old guy up here. And so really, kind of when you look at it, Juan Carlos, what are the lessons that we're learning as these conversations are evolving, and how can we start to think better, right, to scale this, right? Because we need the finance, we need the technology, and we need the right people in the room, not the people that are taking it, not the same of the old, more of the new.
Absolutely, and I think the ambassador from the Bahamas mentioned this during the Island Resilience Summit here about 2 days ago. We need to move from executing or trying to execute projects to scaling up solutions. Why do I say this? Because all of our countries have been flooded by projects and projects and projects from different entities. But ultimately, we spend 70% of the time figuring out the bureaucracy to be able to access and procure those funds than actually focusing on the real output or the real solution that those funds should deliver. Why? Because there is not a global standard from funders on what are all the prerequisites that a country needs to have in order to access funding, specifically from the multilateral development side. And that is why the DBRP is so important, because the current landscape is so complicated that you have a country like Panama waiting 10 years on executing a project of $200 million just because bureaucracies cannot understand each other, and we have to spend so much time administratively. So one of the solutions is moving away from project to programs and alliances. Additionally, the other reason why we have not been quite successful at achieving all those goals is because we don't have the staff to be able to execute separate initiatives as individual silos. We are so resource constrained, and now globally, we're going to be more resource constrained. So the easier way is, once again, the boring thing. We need global standards. We need the development banks. We need the international private finance institutions to have just a basic cheat that we all abide with to be able to access those funds. Otherwise, we're going to spend 30 more years just fighting with bureaucracy while the climate keeps heating up and we keep losing biodiversity.
Yeah, look, we've seen the world in the last 24 months, I dare say, transform night and day. I remember being in a conversation with Glenn, I don't know where he's at, Glenn Gaffney, where he was talking about when at the IQT, when they were looking at AI, and when they looked at where we are today, their bet was 2040 plus. And, this is the most intelligent agency in the planet. And, and at the speed that we're evolving, so when you look at what can we do better, right, with government, and how can we use innovations like the DBRP and protect nature, I think, and also use the technology to work smarter, not harder. Right? Because to me, one of the things that I'm most passionate about in the work that we do is tech transfer. Why do we have 10 companies that are worth $32 trillion in countries that are still suffering to put food on the table? And it's not about taking money out of their pocket. No, not one of those. Saying, how do we grab the learnings, the technology transfer, and bring it over to help scale and leapfrog these countries? Right? Everyone goes to the government side to create value, but doesn't give value back. Right? It goes back to POR. And so, I think we're living in monumental times where we all together can be that change. And so, Lord Fakafanua, can you kind of answer the same question, from your perspective as well? Because again, as you're leading in policy making and building the structures, and I know because I, live on all sides of the conversation, the frustration that it is to dedicate all this time and effort and limited resources, as Juan said, to then have nobody show up because all they want is the money, right? But they don't want to bring the talent. They don't want to transfer the IP, but they want to take yours, right? How do we solve all that? What do you see that future start to look like?
So, in the past, as a developing country, we look up to other developing countries. They've made the transition from developing to developed. Like South Korea,
We've seen it in our lifetime.
Like South Korea, like Singapore, and they've been very smart and quite concerted in their efforts, and and we applaud them. But fundamentally, what we're looking at is there was the promise that the multilateral system will assist us in our developing. That promise hasn't been
It's
realized.
failed us.
And then climate change came across in the forefront, and multilaterals were slow to respond to the needs of developing countries, and so we decided to build this thing called the Green Climate Fund. And the Green Climate Fund was supposed to be a shortcut for us to achieve our targets as to become more resilient in the face of climate change. Green Climate Fund failed. To give you a real-life example, we applied to the Green Climate Fund for a resilient wall, seawall, because of the rising sea level, to protect some of our coastal areas, people's infrastructure, people's homes. It took 7 years. 7 years for the fund. And so...
Folks, this is reality, by the way. This is literally the private sector can get money in 90 days. It's something that could save an island that everybody cries about and everybody, lays on the ground of a highway to defend. But 9 years, 7 years.
7 years. And oh, by the way, the Green Climate Fund is supposed to be a direct access fund for small and developing states and people who are very vulnerable. You need to be accredited to even apply for the money. And to get accreditation, the average time is 5 years. And by the way, Tonga doesn't have any agency that is accredited. So we have to apply to intermediaries like other multilaterals, I won't say their names, who, by the way, when we get the funding that we applied for, get a cut.
They take 30, 40, what?
So the seawall that was supposed to be 20 kilometers ends up being 8. And between the 7 years and the 5 years that we're waiting, we've gone through 7 tropical cyclones. So Green Climate Fund doesn't help, and we're looking at these new innovative mechanisms, and the idea is that digital assets and deploying these very smart pathways for the flows to reach where it's needed gives us hope, and so I'm very skeptical but optimistic at the possibility that technology and digital assets will be able to bridge that gap and the divide, and hopefully we can become more resilient.
So now how do you see the development bank play a role as a multilateral framework, right? Because the digital assets is private sector stakeholders. So now let's talk about multilateralism, right? And look at, what we've heard, Gene. I'm sorry? Absolutely. Go ahead, but play a role.
I have to say that the good thing about this is that we are a co-creator of the new multilateral system, and we subscribe to valuing nature and tokenizing, and we need to recenter the whole paradigm, and it's a shift away from the GDP model that Gene was talking about.
Thank you. We have a guest appearance here with Dr. Leon, and he raised his hand, and definitely I think this is a fitting conversation for him to enter. Please.
Thank you. Now, I just wanted to add to 2 points. 2 points, one made by Lord Fakafanua and the other by Juan Carlos. The problem you face is ultimately a governance problem. Governance in the sense of control. Control. How does a GCF put 5-year restrictions, compliance, regulatory norms, rules, accreditation to get you the money that has been agreed? Because the masters have said this is the rules of operation. We do not have voice. And because you don't have voice, meaning small countries or smaller countries, because you don't have voice, your priorities, your needs can never reach the level of urgency it requires. And therefore, my sense is, however much reform we talk about in the global space, that reform will never meet the needs of small islands, less developed countries to the extent that they need, because there is still the chokehold of control. And hence one of the big things that the DBRP is about is it gives control, majority control to small island states. And as a result of that, the priorities, the needs, the dictates of countries in our governance structure can always rise to the top. That's the first. The second is the aggregator function. We cannot change GCF and GEF and AF. We cannot. Let's not fool ourselves. We cannot. It already exists. They have mandates and rules of operation. But we can work smarter and better. What if we can say a DBRP can be the sole interlocutor with size and might and strength to speak with your GCFs and your GEFs and not get pieces of money, but get a blob, 3 million, 5 billion, 3 billion, 5 billion, specifically to do the things that our countries want. And now you have your bilateral member relations with a DBRP that says no more red tape, no more bureaucracy, because I have a pool of money from those people who say they have money to give, lodged in the DBRP, and now we can deploy it with the help of your AI, your technology, not at 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, but glacial speed, but the warp speed of less than 2 weeks, 1 month on demand. That is the goal we need to be talking about.
Thank you, Dr. Leon. And I mean, that couldn't have a better closing to this conversation, right? Multilateral mobilization, right? The red tape that Gene spoke about and gentlemen here spoke about is real. And that doesn't make the newspapers. That doesn't make even the cover or, you know, section F24 of the New York Times, because nobody wants to print that. Nobody wants to print the reality and the issues. And to us, I believe everything that we're talking about here with digital assets, with the DBRP, with the preservation and conservation of nature, it's about, you know, the balance of multi-stakeholderism, as we heard before, right? Public, private sector, civil society, standards and norms. So, you know, with that, I'm going to end this panel, but I'm going to pose one more question and then leave Mr. Juan Carlos Monterrey Gomez up here to close us out overall as a summit. So, Juan, can you tell everyone here, you know, as we talk about leadership, and you two guys literally pioneers in leading in the planet, tell us a little bit about the Nature Summit that's happening in Panama on the 19th of May, it's right around the corner, the significance of it, very important, significance, where we are in time, juxtaposition of economies, multilateralism, fractured geopolitics, why it's so important now more than ever, right? And also, as we looked and we talked about today, right, the digital asset revolution, because what we saw and we heard everybody talk about and how that community, including the .com and all the different tech people, you know, how it's now an open architecture. Everybody understands what we've seen in the last 15, 20 years has not worked. It's not worked for humanity. It might have worked for the select few, but it's not truly open, as we heard Sean say as well. So how do we look at that for sustainability? And the importance, as Gene just talked about, which is an anchor to the Nature Summit, is the Development Bank for Resilience Prosperity, because it's reimagined multilateralism with infrastructure that supports exactly, you know, what Lord Fakafanua mentioned, which is the need of these countries, the need for expedition of infrastructure and for multilateralism to actually work for them, not just to be a fancy word that everybody learned after COVID. The entire planet was like, oh, multilateralism, right? It's been around. And for it to actually be fit for purpose, as Gene said. So with that, we're going to depart. Juan Carlos.
Thank you so much, Sergio.
Take us.
So,
that's his stage now. Thank you, everybody.
So there will come a time when each one of you will have to answer one question. What did we do when we knew? The question that we have today is what we know today. And we know many things. We know that we have double carbon emissions over the past 33 years, while at the same time we were trying to cut them. We know that we're marching silently towards the next mass extinction that is going to exterminate half of all living creatures. And we know that plastics are not only polluting our babies, but are also polluting our soil and are part of almost every water source that we have on Earth. But we also know that we have roadmaps to be able to tackle these issues. We have the Paris Agreement to tackle climate. We have the biodiversity agreements to tackle biodiversity loss. And we're working on a global plastic treaty to be able to cut the production of this very poisonous material. But what we also know is that over the past few months, it has become harder to advance these agendas because changes in geopolitics. Over this entire week, and especially today, we have learned about how every actor is important, how the government needs the private sector, needs civil society, and we also need the activists. But because there has been a massive shift in global politics, the UN can no longer accommodate for these other actors to engage on the conversation. So the week of May 19th, we're going to be hosting the first ever Global Climate Week, but this event is only for governments. But because we believe that there must be a space for all actors to engage, we have partnered with PVBLIC Foundation as a philanthropic partner, with Global Resilience Partners led by Matt Tranchin as a private sector partner, and we are creating a space that we call the Nature Summit, where we're basically filling up that leadership void. Even though some might pull out of the climate agenda, Panama is saying we're taking the lead. So we're bringing the world to Panama for the first time since the last climate meeting in Baku. And it is through PVBLIC and with the support of Global Resilience Partners that we're getting this done. Because without this partnership, non-state actors will not have a space to build the alliances to get us to where we need to be. And where we need to be, we need to decarbonize. We need to make sure that those in the front lines, especially small island nations, are going to be able to sustain the impacts that we can no longer prevent. And that is why the president of Panama, on his government plan, included a provision to build stronger alliances with the islands. And we also need to move away from plastic. So at the Nature Summit, we are going to be learning about how the new carbon tax for the maritime industry is going to impact communities, countries, and businesses. We're going to learn about the top solutions for the fashion industry that is one of the most polluting in the planet. We're going to be learning more about how some countries are advancing on the tokenization of their natural assets and many more things. So whatever you do, make sure that you tell more people about the Nature Summit. Make sure that you consider coming to the Nature Summit. If you are interested on it, you can approach Sergio, Matt, or myself. And before I conclude, I just really want to thank EarthX, Tramo. This is my fourth EarthX. I think I've said it a few times. First, I came here as a World Bank consultant. Next year, I came as a conservation NGO leader. Last year, I came as an anti-mining advocate. And today, I came as the envoy for Climate of Panama. Seems like I get a promotion every time I come to EarthX. So let's see what's happened. So week of May 19th, Panama, Nature Summit, we want you there. If you want to be there, just approach us and we're going to make it happen. Thank you.
Mike, hello. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. This brings us to a close. Thank you, Juan. Next year, what, President of Panama? All right, this brings us to a close. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, for giving us a time on Friday. And again, please take this time to connect with each other. Everyone here is doing amazing work. So don't just run out of here. You know, have some free water and connect with each other. Thank you so much.